Okay, now we're gonna go over how to sew a seam together with bias tape. What you're gonna need is bias tape, pins. I recommend Wonder Clips, and then you also may want a basting tape. I do find that it helps get it really like lined up well. I think a lot of people have trouble once you kind of flip it over to the other side and are doing that final stitch. Sometimes it's hard to catch the bias tape on both sides, and I'll explain what I mean when we get to that part. But those are kind of the general supplies you need. The first step is pretty easy. What you're going to do is you're going to take your bias tape and line it up on your seam, and you can see here we have the right sides facing each other. And then you're going to line it up with the edge and just pin it in place. So now that we have that pinned in place, we can go ahead and sew this down. You can see here I have this crease from where it was ironed. We're going to want to stitch right inside that, only because you're stitching two quilted pieces of fabric together. It can get a little bulky, so if you stitch too far this way, it can make it hard when turning it to the other side. So I recommend doing a little inside, and we can measure to see about how much that will be. So you're going to want to do about 3/8 of an inch from the edge. And we can go ahead and sew that in place. Alright, so you can see here, let's see, the focus is, I stitched right inside that iron crease. And then we're going to go ahead and take our pins out. And then I recommend ironing it away from your coat. We'll flip it over. And then you can see it's going to line up pretty perfectly with the stitch line that's already there. So really what you're going to do for this part is fold it over. You want it to go just past this stitch line, so you can see here like that. So when you edge stitch, you won't be able to see that line from this side. If you wanted to use the basting tape, I recommend putting it right up to the stitch line there. And then it'll just help you stick it in place. And this is super helpful because when you get to the sewing it down, this tape will definitely help keep it in place, whereas pins, you never really know if it's going to keep it completely secure. And then sometimes you'll kind of like miss part of it. Now I would personally still use the Wonder Clips, and if you aren't using the basting tape, this is the method I recommend. Just make sure your basting tape is water soluble. That way it will wash out when you wash your coat and it won't gum up your machine or anything like that. So I'm going to take you to the sewing machine just so you can see how close I stitch. And I do stitch on the side that you originally had sewn on. So you just flipped everything over to this side. We're going to sew from here down. So let's get started on that. Okay, so we're at our machine, ready to stitch this down. Again, make sure you flip it over. So this side here is the one that's open, that we put the basting tape on, and we'll stitch from this side. I do just find that it's easier to get both sides to catch both edges when you actually sew it down. So you're gonna sew maybe about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of your bias tape on this side. You don't want to go too far that way, or else you're gonna have a huge little like flap of bias tape on the other side, and if you go too far that way, you're not going to catch the bias tape on the other side. So I would give it about 1/8 of an inch, and just take it really slow, taking out the wonder clips as you go. And when you're taking out your wonder clips, especially if you don't have basting tape there, I recommend doing it very gently. So you don't want to just like pull at it. I usually open and then like slide it very carefully away, so that way it doesn't drag the bias tape underneath with it. So you can see here, this is the side we stitched on top of, and that's the underside, caught all the way across. So that basting tape really does help a ton in this situation, and that's really all you have to do. You can go ahead and trim the edges over here and over here, but other than that, that is how you sew a seam with bias tape. I just wanted to pop in really quick, if you're going to be finishing just a raw edge with bias tape, it is almost exactly the same as finishing a seam, except for you're gonna sew right in that crease on the ironed line, so 1/2 inch from the edge rather than 3/8. The rest of it is gonna be exactly the same. So if you've never sewn bias tape on a corner, I'm gonna show you how really quick. When you reach the corner, you're gonna go all the way past. Then you're gonna bring it up like this, so you'll have a 45-degree angle here. This edge is gonna line up with this edge here, and then we're gonna bring it back like this. So again, this edge will line up with this one, and that one will still be lined up with that one. It will look like this when you bring it up. And then you're just gonna pin that down. Now when you get to sewing this piece down, say you're coming this way, you're gonna keep going, sewing along this line, and then stop when you reach 1/2 inch from this edge here. So if you're sewing 1/2 inch seam allowance on this side, you'll stop right in that corner so that there will be 1/2 inch here. You'll back stitch and cut, and then you'll flip your flap basically like this and pin it here again, and then starting from the very top, you'll sew all the way down and keep sewing in that 1/2 inch seam allowance.